Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've heard a great deal about protocol this last week, and it all centers around the invitation by the Speaker of this House to the Prime Minister of Israel to come and speak to the body as he has done twice before. It's worth, Mr. Speaker, that Bibi Netanyahu is one of the most prescient voices that we have in the entire world to address some of the subjects and some of the dangers that face the United States of America. And yet, this administration is caught up in a conundrum over protocol. While it might be worth reminding this administration that ours is a government made up of three equal branches, it is even more important to remind this administration that when Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons capability with which to threaten the peace and security of the entire world, when ISIS and groups like it are slaughtering people the world over, when ISIS is crucifying and killing and torturing people in Iraq, when they're burning their prisoners alive in cages, this administration is caught up in protocol. Mr. Speaker, that is a profound distortion of priority. And yet, ironically, this administration, for all of its talk of protocol, not only violated protocol when it traded 5 Taliban leaders for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, it broke the law itself, Mr. Speaker. This administration has repeatedly sought to unconstitutionally usurp the powers of the legislative branch by brash fiat. It chooses to listen to this mysterious voice of those who did not vote in our nation's election. Its constitutional overreach is evidenced by Cuba, immigration, and Obamacare, and a number of others. But if we just put that litany aside for a moment and just consider the arrogance of this administration as it comes now to proclaim that the Speaker of this House has somehow broken protocol by inviting the Prime Minister of our most vital ally on earth to on this floor. Worse, Mr. Speaker, it has sought to go after and silence the guest speaker himself. Hearing the visceral rhetoric of this White House, one would think our Speaker had invited the Prime Minister of an enemy nation instead of one of our best friends on the planet. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, this administration's claims of breached protocol are an attempt to overshadow the real elephant in the room and truth itself. The actual outrage here is not about the Israeli elections, as some might say. It is not about the doomed diplomatic overtures of this administration. The real crisis and the real threat is a nuclear-capable Iran. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, with the greatest credentials on earth related to this threat, in coming to speak to all of us, is acting as a trusted ally should act. And I hope this administration and this Congress and the American people will listen to him very carefully. The true problem here, Mr. Speaker, is that an outspoken enemy of our nation, one that is indeed the leading state sponsor of global Islamic terrorism, is actively pursuing nuclear weapons that could create the gravest of threats to the United States, Israel, and the entire free world. How quickly we forget that Iran considers the United States of America the, quote, great Satan. How quickly we forget that last year on November 4th, Iran once again celebrated Death to America Day, commemorating the 1979 seizure of the United States Embassy. How quickly we forget that Death to America is the rallying cry of Hezbollah, for which it's been backed by Iran and launched attacks on Israel just last week, killing and wounding good men. We forget that one of Iran's stated goals is, quote, wiping Israel off the map. How quickly we forget that Iran collaborates with anti-U.S. regimes in South America and is actively seeking to exploit our borders and, of course, this administration's complete inattention to them. How quickly we forget that Iran continues to cooperate with North Korea in the development of long-range missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads to the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, is this administration so naive or worse, so arrogant as to believe that we can have any type of credible diplomatic agreement with the leadership of such a regime. I think it's embarrassing, Mr. Speaker, to the United States of America that this supposed breach of protocol has somehow permitted this administration, through anonymous yet somehow authoritative sources, to politically threaten the elected leader of our only democratic ally in the region, calling him names in the media and being vindictive in its every interaction with him. Yet none of this salve for the administration's wounded ego has furthered the interest of the United States one iota. Ultimately, it has only diminished America's national security and Israel's right to defend herself. Mr. Speaker, there are unfortunately only three things that will prevent Iran from eventually gaining nuclear weapons. One is a fundamental change of the regime in Iran. Two, a direct military action to destroy their capability to build nuclear weapons capability. Or, finally, Mr. Speaker, the conviction in the minds of the leadership in Iran, the jihadist leadership in Iran, that military action will occur if that capability is not dismantled. Mr. Speaker, indifference, cowardice, diplomacy, call it what you will, but in the end, ignorance, whether intentional or unintentional, is not a viable alternative to the truth. Along with so many others in this body, Mr. Speaker, and really in America itself, I have every conviction that when Prime Minister Netanyahu speaks on the threat that Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons and its sponsorship of terrorism poses to global security, he will be speaking the truth. And once again, for the sake of America, for Israel, and for the free world, I pray that we all listen very carefully. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.